This has been going on for a while, this ongoing legal battle, but somewhat recently the Trump administration got involved. It involves my state, Washington State, and it was originally like a statewide issue. Now it's a nationwide issue. Here you can get a feel for the nature of the conflict, very much in theme with what's been going on lately over at DC, just with the title: Trump and the Catholic Church fight a law requiring clergy to report child abuse. Washington moved to close a dangerous loophole. Now there's a constitutional showdown pitting religious freedoms against the duty to protect children. If a mandatory reporter, like a teacher or a doctor, like a psychiatrist, catches wind of child abuse, child sexual abuse, physical, anything in that ballpark, right? They are legally required to disclose it to the government, for reasons that I'm sure make sense to everyone watching. Priests have not been subject to this. Which is, considering the fact that Catholic priests do confessionals, they are party to a lot of very sensitive information. The state of Washington put forward a law saying, no, now priests are also mandated reporters. And in response, they were met with a lawsuit arguing that it violates the religious freedom of the Catholic Church. This has been going on for a while. What happened more recently is that the Trump administration jumped in to back the priests. So not the most unlikely union here on defending the right to protect child predators, the Trump administration and the Catholic Church. On the morning of May 2nd, 2025, supporters of Washington Senate Bill 5375 were ushered through the massive concrete arches and up the grand staircases of the Washington State Capitol. Beautiful building, by the way, just gotta say. The veins of Alaskan Tokian marble guiding them past oil portraits and century-old busts to the governor's conference room on the second floor. Inside, amid the dark wood paneling and gleaming seal of the state, Bob Ferguson, Washington's new governor and former attorney general, addressed the small crowd of advocates, lawmakers, and child abuse survivors who had gathered behind him. "I'm a Catholic, as some of you all know. I'm aware of my upbringing," he said before adding plainly, "For me, this is a very clear legislation and important legislation." Ferguson uncapped a blue felt tip paper mate. Sorry, mate. I'm not watching anime right now. Paper mate. And with a stroke of his pen signed into law one of the most consequential child protection measures in recent memory, mandating the state's clergy, for the first time in 50 years, to report child abuse. The room felt like it was buzzing, recalls Sarah Young, an advocate who was there that morning. She grew up one of the Jehovah's Witnesses, surviving years of abuse she said congressional elders ignored. Well, yeah, that's the whole point of Jehovah's Witnesses, right? None of us really knew what to expect, but being there felt like a weight finally lifted. For supporters like Young, it closed a loophole that let clergy across denominations keep abuse in the dark. For opponents, it was an attack on religious freedom with no exception for sacred rites like confession. I'm sorry, I just don't care. I just don't care. If you've abused children and you want to keep that a secret from the state, you can keep it a secret from God and go to hell. I don't know what you want. I'm sorry. I don't know what you want. Within 72 hours, Trump's Justice Department, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi, had launched a First Amendment probe into what it called an anti-Catholic law. The Archdiocese of Seattle, along with the Diocese of Yakima and Spokane, filed a federal lawsuit claiming the new law was a punch thrown straight at the Catholic Church, that it forces priests to choose between obeying the state or violating a core religious duty. Then, on June 23rd, the U.S. Department of Justice formally threw its weight behind the Catholic Church, filing a formal motion to intervene in the case, a request that was granted on Tuesday. And on Friday, Judge David G. Estudio issued a preliminary injunction blocking enforcement of the new law as to the sacrament of confession for the Seattle, Yakima, and Spokane diocese, days before its July 27th effective date. That's today. So today, this law would have gone into effect were it not for the preliminary injunction by the one Judge David G. Estudio. What began as a move to close a dangerous loophole exploded into a high-stakes national fight over the limits of religious liberty, whether the First Amendment allows church doctrine to override secular law when the two conflict. No. In my humble opinion, no. It shouldn't. It's the secular law. The secular law should take precedent. Sorry, Spokane, not Spokane. My apologies, okay? Do psychologists have to disclose stuff they've heard about child abuse from their clients? Yeah. Or I think it's like if they've reported anything that's happened within a time frame, or if there's risk of it happening in the near future or something to that effect. Yeah, I don't know the exact parameters. But yes, at its core, the battle turns on a crucial question for the courts, and now the country are forced to confront. Where does religious freedom end and the duty to protect children begin? Love that these are like juxtaposed, you know? I love that these are like on opposite sides of the wall, which I suppose is true. I mean, it's an honest reflection of the state of affairs. If one confesses to child abuse, doesn't the clergy have a duty to protect the child as a member of the flock too? No, you just have to say 5 Hail Marys or something. Type shit. Under Washington's new child protection law, clergy of all denominations are on the hook, just like physicians, nurses, social workers, teachers, law enforcement officers, child care providers, and others. The law does not force priests to testify in court, turn over notes, or violate attorney-client privilege. What it does is narrow but consequential. If clergy learn about child abuse, even during confession, they have to notify authorities within 48 hours. Seems reasonable to me. That single requirement closes a loophole most states still leave wide open. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why the right often hates therapy, social workers, teachers, etc. Because there are a bunch of types of authority that, like, especially children might interact with, that have responsibilities to report to the state. And religious authorities have no such obligation, you know? This is why, you know, usually you've got these like crank right-wing, lives in the hills, you know, herbal and prayer medicine rather than going to a doctor types. But there's a reason why they lean so heavily on religious authority. This makes no sense. The whole point of confession, they have to show regret and make right with those they harm. Therefore, they have to turn themselves in. No, confession's largely for Catholics about making right with God. Doesn't really have anything to do with secular law, you know? Like, it obviously depends on the priest that's being confessed to, you know, and I guess how sussy that priest is. But, like, in practice, you know, usually it's like, yeah, don't do that again, 5 Hail Marys, or 50 Hail Marys, you know, whatever. Where's the line for religious freedom? Somewhere that doesn't interfere with secular law. I think that's a fair one, you know, personally. I'm not going to tell you what hat you can or can't wear. I do think that priests should be mandated reporters, though. Across the U.S., child abuse reporting laws are a fragmented patchwork shaped by decades of political compromise and religious lobbying. Over the past 2 decades, efforts in other states, such as Kentucky, Montana, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, to remove the clergy penitent exception have routinely stalled long before any high-profile shutdown. Technically, clergy in all 50 states, D.C., and Guam are mandatory reporters of child abuse, but 33 states carve out exceptions for what is learned in confession or spiritual counseling. So, in effect, for those 33 states, they're not mandatory reporters of child abuse. Because then, like, literally any, like, they would just exclusively talk about this in the context of spiritual counseling or confession. Washington now joins just 6 other states, including some of the most religiously conservative in the country, that take exemptions for clergy off the table completely. New Hampshire, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Texas, and West Virginia. That is that's an interesting cohort of states, you know? But even where states have laws like this on paper, enforcement is often a dead end. That's because 36 states have either their own Religious Freedom Restoration Acts or constitutional provisions requiring strict scrutiny for laws that burden religious practice. In those states, mandatory reporting rules that reach the confessional are nearly impossible to enforce. Great. In much of the country, that means a priest or pastor can legally keep abuse secret if it's disclosed in a privileged setting. Washington has no state-level RFRA, but its constitution has at times been interpreted to demand strict scrutiny for religious freedom claims. The lack of certainty around religious exemptions, and specifically confession, is part of what has made Washington's new law so contested. It's the same bullshit that Republicans use to stop bills that ban child marriage. Yeah? Lawsuit Washington. It's actually really difficult to find reporting on this, which is pretty disheartening. There are a couple of articles that you can find talking about the DOJ suing, but it is literally, like, unambiguously, inarguably, the Trump administration locking arms with the Catholic Church to fight to protect child abusers. That's it. Like, that's the only way this shakes out, you know? More to throw into the Epstein pile, man. But people aren't really talking about this so much. I guess we'll see how the lawsuit pans out. Isn't the Pope woke? Yeah, but he doesn't have much control over this. And even if he did have direct control, I don't know how hard he'd be willing to press his feet down on the pedal, you know? Versus Ferguson hinges on the argument that Washington's law imposes specific burdens on Catholic clergy that do not apply equally to other religions. Because the Catholic Church is one of the few religious organizations with a doctrine of absolute confidentiality, the complaint asserts, Washington's law uniquely targets and burdens Catholic priests. So a law that applies to everyone equally disproportionately targets Catholics because the Catholics are one of the only religious groups that have such strict rules protecting disclosures of child abuse. Okay, that's great. This is quite an extensive article. In 2022, Seattle investigative journalist Wilson Christian dug into allegations of child abuse in Washington state congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses. The result was an incendiary expose for Investigate West that uncovered not only a decades-long pattern of child abuse, but a coordinated effort to conceal it. Yeah? Maybe they shouldn't hide child abuse? If they weren't hiding child abuse, there would be no point to being a Jehovah's Witness. Like, why else would they do that, you know? It's like the point of every cult. Like, every cult boils down to why the patriarch in that specific community deserves to have 16 child wives. It always pans out the exact same way. And money, and money, and money.